Well, hello, and welcome back to the Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
I'm Phil.
And this is a podcast where we journey chapter by chapter through C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. This is chapter 13 of The Silver Chair, Underland Without the Queen.
We had quite a abrupt end to the last chapter. How would you characterize this chapter overall?
This is very much a in-between chapter.
It's a transition chapter.
It is a transition chapter. It is the most transition-y of chapters we have had, and I want to say a long time.
Yeah, I think certainly for this book.
I don't want to say it's a bad chapter. That's not a great way to start a podcast. Is hey, everyone check in here. We didn't like this chapter. But this chapter was very heavy on the transition between chapter 12 from last time and what we both can assume is something more important, does it sound bad to say like that, in chapter 14, because really not a lot happens here.
It doesn't, but this is what we're running into is just the format of our podcast. We break everything into a chapter and we spend an entire episode on each chapter. When you're reading the book, you're not analyzing each chapter the way we are. And this is, we're doing a deeper dive, and this is usually not the first time that people are reading this. People don't analyze it this much on the first read, I guess I should say.
No, I agree. And this is always going to be something we come into, we have this problem every once in a while, which is that, like you just said, this chapter really does not stand well on its own. There's not any kind of clear story or event that happens here that isn't directly connected to other chapters. And some chapters, that isn't the case. I mean, just last episode when we had Father Dan on to talk about chapter 12, I mean, when the witch enters in to the Dark Castle, there's a clear story with a beginning, middle, and end in that one chapter. You know, when we think back to some of the stuff with the giants or even Puddleglum's introduction back in chapter 5, there are chapters in this book and in the rest of the Narnia series that do have kind of a clear narrative, whereas this one it's very much just an in-between. This is a little episode that gets us, between two places. Literally, it's moving us from one place to another. And again, it's got great prose from Lewis, a lot of great descriptions here. There's a couple of great character moments. It is, though, a chapter that struggles on its own.
One thing to point out, though, is that if you were reading this and you had just had the chair broken apart and then the battle with the witch, this would be kind of a nice break where you get out, you're in a new setting, but there's nothing too intense happening directly. There are intense things about to happen, but this is a nice kind of respite while we're building up to the next thing.
Yeah. Well, we've already started talking quite a bit about this chapter. It only seems fair that we actually summarize it and get into our discussion here. And because it's an odd chapter, I have the chapter summary. Are you ready, Phil?
I'm ready.
All right. Our four heroes collect themselves after the defeat of the Lady of the Green Kirtle. They decide that they will leave the Underland through a hole at the spot of what was to be the invasion into the Overland. As they leave the Dark Castle, they are surprised to hear the bustling of the once quiet city. Rillian notices rising water levels, and Puddleglum wisely concludes that the witch must have put a curse on the Overland in the event of her demise. Jill, Eustace, Puddleglum, and Rillian ride on horseback away from the flood and towards the exit to the Overland. As they continue, Puddleglum captures one of the Earthmen, who bites at his hand. In an unexpected turn of events, however, the Earthman calls the travelers friends when he learns of the witch's death.
Ooh, there's a nice summary right at the end there, especially.
Yeah, you didn't like the beginning, though.
Very succinct. Well, sometimes you need to reach 150 words.
I didn't get anywhere close. I think I was like at 130 or something.
Yeah, not a ton of action or new reveals here.
Yeah. Let's go back, though, to the beginning. You're right. There is this revelation here at the end. I think we both had assumed, at least on my first read, I assumed this, that the Earthmen were all working. These gnomes were all working for the witch, and then we discovered that might not be the case. But we're not there yet, Phil. What are your initial thoughts to this chapter?
My biggest takeaway is the fact that the witch thought ahead enough to have a doomsday device in case she died.
She really is prepared.
Yeah. And
you think
just pure evil.
Yeah, she's very much the Girl Scout of Narnia. Isn't that there, or is that the Boy Scouts that do that?
That's a loaded statement. The Boy Scouts motto is "Be prepared."
The Boy Scouts motto is "Be prepared." Okay, I was not a boy. Were you a Boy Scout?
Just for a little bit.
I was never one at all. I was like, no thanks. I have my video games inside. I wish I actually had been a Boy Scout, but
Yeah. I wish I had video games, but to each of us their own.
Yeah, 8-year-old me was just not interested in being outdoors as much as I should have been.
Yeah.
But she is prepared. You're exactly right. She's really prepared here. I am anxious about this flood that is happening. I don't like. I love being on the water. The idea of flooding, though, in a cave, absolutely terrifies me.
Yeah, that's a big fear. I would say there's nowhere to go. How do you escape that?
No, it's really frightening. And that sense of impending dread does carry us throughout this chapter. That's some of the atmospheric language that Lewis uses here. Really paints a picture for us of a world that is slowly falling apart, and the people inside of it are realizing that. As soon as and we can jump in here, I guess, as soon as our what are we going to call them? Our 4 travelers here, when they leave the dark castle, they have all of this noise, and there's all this running about by the gnomes of the city, and a lot of it's in terror.
Yeah, and they're running in an interesting way. They're darting about. Some of them are remaining in the shadows, and we don't get a full explanation of why that is yet.
Why do you think it is?
It sounds like they're kind of the special forces, and they're moving around in some kind of planned attack. But by the end of the chapter, with the reveal that one of them is pretty thrilled that the queen is dead, it seems like maybe they're just trying to stay out of sight of her in case she was doing something. They thought maybe she was causing all this, and they're trying to escape without being seen. Who knows?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. There is that just fear all about us. Well, what happens as they leave the castle? Because really, they like I said in the summary, they just they have to take care of Puddleglum's burnt foot, which I hope had stopped smelling at this point. Or do you think it's lingering? Is it there the rest of the book?
I feel like the smell is lingering where they left, but it's not coming with them.
Who rides on the horse with them later in the chapter? I think it's Jill that rides with Puddleglum. Do you think she's smelling both horse and burnt marshwiggle?
I think they're so concerned with the place collapsing around them, they're not even thinking about that.
I think that Jill is bothered by it. Everything smells kind of
damp. But she's too polite to say anything.
Yeah, she's too nice. But I think everything's kind of damp because everything's getting wet from the flooding. Plus, Puddleglum burnt his foot. And then, horses, they don't always smell bad, but these have been horses that were underground. I assume they're not the most beautiful smelling horses. That's not a word used to describe smell.
We do get a comment about how good the smell is of the stable itself.
That is true. So actually,
she has a connection to the horses.
Maybe it would be fair to assume that the horse smells all right.
Yeah. This is not too bad. It's just a foot.
My apologies to the horse, which both horses have great names here. Do you remember either of their names?
One of them is Coal Black.
Coal Black and Snowflake.
Snowflake, yeah.
I like both of those names for horses.
Yeah. You can't quite top Shadowfax, but it's close.
Or how about Bill the Pony? Don't forget about Bill the Pony from all the way. Did they pick up Bill and Bree, or does Bill go with them from the Shire?
I don't recall.
Okay, you've just read it recently. I know, yeah.
You have 17 copies of it.
That's fair enough. Well, we've gotten ahead of ourselves, Phil. We're so excited about these horses that we have left behind a couple of important things here. Let's go back to this revelation of the darting to and fro by the gnomes here, and talk about this red light that is seen. Do you remember what's happening here?
It's the first thing they notice once they are outside, kind of the rooms where they were. It has this great red glow, and its reflection is on the roof of the underworld, but it's thousands of feet above them. So this is a pretty distinct, very bright source of light, but they're still not sure what it is.
When you hear 1,000 feet, what do you think of?
When Luke Skywalker gets his hand cut off, and he watches it go down.
That's what 1,000 feet is to you.
Yeah. It's probably in parsecs, though.
I 1,000 feet. When I think of that, I know that the Empire State Building is like 1,300 feet. I think something around there. So we're to assume that this cave is so large that you could almost fit the Empire State Building inside of it.
Wow.
That is a very, very large cave.
That would be 3 football fields. Does that help?
Yeah, I mean, that's helpful too. I don't usually think of football fields as being vertical, but sure.
Yeah, well, it depends on where you play. I actually do think that's tough. It's hard to visualize stuff that you usually see horizontal, vertical.
Yeah.
So maybe the Empire State Building is a better way to do it.
But that's a very, very tall cave.
It is.
Were you picturing that up until this point?
No, I was thinking 4 feet max. Everybody's hunched over all the time.
Everyone's crouching down. You assume that the great battle, Puddleglum's speech was actually he was crouched down as he's making it. That really takes somehow that takes a lot of the drama out of the scene, a lot of the tension.
I feel like most of the passageways were pretty small, maybe 6 or 7 feet at the most. But the room where they were, that would probably be a little larger. You know, if you're going to spend some time in there, you carve it out a little bit more.
I want to imagine Puddleglum was actually crab walking to get over to the fire to stamp it out with his foot. He crab walks over there and kind of like can't reach it at first, and he stabs it out. And then the fighting of the snake is all done pretty much where they're just rolling all over the place.
You could rewrite a lot of stories by just making the ceilings 4 feet tall.
And this is the scene where Aurelian notices the water levels rising. Here's what he says. He says, "Look, all the ships are driving into the city. By my head, the sea's rising. The flood is upon us. Aslan be praised. This castle stands on high ground, but their water comes on grimly fast." Again, this is another kind of tally under the Aslan knew exactly what would be needed, right? The providence of Aslan throughout this story, this all the way to under me. We talked about it, I think, back in chapter 11 as well, too, about kind of arguing and discussing when Aurelian, says, "Hey, come back later." You were arguing more of like he's doing this so that they can come back and free him, and my thought was more of no, he's doing it. This is a coincidence, not really a coincidence, obviously, but this is just the providence. So here, and whether or not whatever side you land on in that little debate we had, I think this one again though kind of comes to the castle being built high. You could argue just hey. Castles are usually built on higher land. That makes sense. But I think that does a disservice to the providence here to say, yeah, they are, just like under me did mean go under me when they needed it to. But there's a larger, more divine hand at work here.
Right. The fact that things line up this many times points to Aslan's providence for sure.
And so as he says this, it's Puddleglum who says, "The witch has laid a train of magic spells so that whenever she was killed at that same moment, her whole kingdom would fall to pieces. She's the sort that wouldn't so much mind dying herself if she knew that the chap who killed her was going to be burned or buried or drowned 5 minutes later."
The fact that all those things are happening is just such a funny combination. Burned, buried, or drowned. She didn't come up with one way. She didn't say, okay, we're going to flood the whole thing. It's burning and it's collapsing. And then she adds water on top of all that.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's rock, paper, and scissors. I also love that the prince says, "Hast hit it, friend Wiggle." It's this beautiful combination of kind of middle-aged speak, but he's also calling him a friend Wiggle.
I love that we could just start taking Marshwiggle out of it. Like I didn't realize that we could just detach that from his name. This has to imply, Philip, that there are other kind of Wiggles. If there can be a Marshwiggle, and then he can call him friend Wiggle. Phil, tell me, what are some of the other Wiggles that we just haven't met yet in Narnia?
Altar Wiggle, Fruit Wiggle. I don't know. I kind of go to a Pokemon place where there are all these different variations.
Oh, okay. I like the Fruit Wiggle. I can just imagine
Wiggle.
This big like bunch of grapes going in with little arms like VeggieTale style.
Yeah.
But I do like that friend Wiggle. We need to let's give a charge to our listeners. Try to use that at some point in the next week.
Yeah, try to call someone a friend Wiggle.
See if you can call somebody a friend Wiggle.
And let us know how it goes.
Yeah. So, but
do you get any Ragnarok vibes from the way this is happening, by the way?
I don't, but tell me why you're thinking that.
Just kind of the place is falling apart. Everything's on fire.
Did that happen in the
Disaster.
movie? I know that we've actually mentioned the movie multiple times this season, but I don't remember that much of it.
The things that you choose not to remember are hindering our progress.
I apologize. So obviously I know Ragnarok is in times, right, in Norse mythology. So I do remember. I don't remember a fire. So
There's a giant creature with a flaming sword, and he just goes to town, literally, on Asgard.
I do remember this. Yeah, he's at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
Okay.
And at the end.
Okay, I don't remember him coming back, but that's on me. I'll acknowledge that's my fault.
Yeah, he's there. He's there at the beginning, and Thor's talking to him, but then later he emerges and destroys the whole town.
Okay. So then, yeah, I mean, this is very apocalyptic in the way that it feels here with the destruction of the Underland. And it's as all of this is unfolding before the eyes of our heroes that they decide, like, we really need to go. Puddleglum asks, really, and if he wants to put his armor on, and he's like, are you serious, Friend Wiggle? I'm not going to do that, right?
I had a bad experience.
Yeah, like, how
but I
could
will
you do
take
that?
the shield.
And what happens to this shield?
Well, this is a fun reveal. There is a change that's come over this shield. Now it's super shiny, and it has a red lion on it.
This is obviously a very clear callback to the very first shield we ever encountered in Narnia, way back in Chapter 10 of Wardrobe, Peter's shield from Father Christmas.
Yeah, so you think it is the same one?
No, I don't think it's the same one. I think it's just kind of the regal symbol for one of the royalty of Narnia, right?
Okay, yeah.
That's what I assume. I mean, do you think that everybody who fights for Narnia in Caspian's army has this kind of shield, or is this just reserved for the kings?
It seems like a pretty special shield, but maybe everybody does.
I think it's just for the kings. That's my take on it.
Yeah. Maybe they didn't have enough vibranium.
You got to stop with the Marvels.
I have a little checklist. How many Marvel references can I get?
I have seen that movie too, though, so I remember that one. Mm-hmm. So there's an interesting thing that happens as they go towards the stables, which you mentioned, to get horses, and after Rillian has grabbed his shield, which is that Jill and Eustace call each other by their first names, as Lewis refers to it, by their Christian names. Even pointing out that obviously at Experiment House, they didn't do that there.
Right.
Had you picked up on this yet, Phil, that they were usually calling each other Pole and Scrub?
I did notice that. I didn't. The first read through it did not notice until Lewis pointed it out that they were referring to each other by their first names. Wonderful way to have the relationships be between different characters be unique. So between just even calling someone a Friend Wiggle is a great example. But the way different characters address each other can show you a lot about their relationship. And this has always been kind of formal and obviously influenced by where they're being educated. But now they've gone through all this stuff. Now they're kind of on a first name basis. I was not familiar with the term Christian names. Do you know anything about that? I've heard given name from the movie Lady Bird.
Yeah, I think Lewis is using this term interchangeably with the phrase given name. You know, from what I understand, the term Christian name is mostly come to be, synonymous with given name. Traditionally, Christian name meant, the name given to a baby when they received the sacrament of baptism. And I'm actually, I might be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure that the pre-Reformation liturgy in England even used the word christen instead of the word I baptize you in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. But I think that's not the point that Lewis is trying to make here. I think he's really mostly trying to show us how their relationship has changed over the course of this journey. That they're now much more familiar with one another than they used to be. What I'm not familiar with, and this is 20th century is not my thing when it comes to history, is I always assumed also that in even more the classical settings that Lewis would have been, even you think of like when he studied with the Great Knock, I would have assumed they all used last names. That just was like the formal thing to do back then.
Yeah.
So I think that's what actually caught me off guard. Not the fact that Jill and Eustace would only use last names, but the fact that would be kind of a mark of their modernism. I just assumed everybody was doing that back then.
Yeah, I feel like it would make and this is not from anything, but it just seems like it would make more sense for a more modern school and like experiment house to have everybody on a first name basis, including the teachers. But maybe that's more reflective of like how our current modern schools are run, not modern as in 50 years ago plus.
There's a couple students at my school, like 8th graders, that think it's the funniest thing to call teachers by their first names, right? Like they'll get really close. They'll be like, do you know, like my mom one time thought about making my middle name be Daniel. It's like they won't call me that.
But they'll say the word.
They'll just try to find, or they'll be like, they'll say, like, my favorite book in the Old Testament is the book of Daniel. They're 14. They think they're the funniest kids. No one else has ever made this kind of joke before.
Yeah. Except you hear it every single year.
Oh, yeah. But I think this is important that this happens at a time when both Jill and Eustace are apologizing for their previous behavior. They really have not. The Underland has really not shown the best side of them. Puddleglum has done exceptionally well here, but Jill and Eustace, not so much.
Right. And it's beautiful that they're both apologizing to each other and becoming more familiar or friendly with each other all at the same time. Nothing like a world collapsing on you and flooding and a fire to
bring everybody close together.
Yeah, just help you kind of take those next steps in your friendship.
It's a helpful reminder that Jill and Eustace really are not that close. They're not friends, you know. They're the first people to come to Narnia that are not from our perspective as the fourth book here, that aren't family members. And
nothing in this story has been easy for them either.
Mm-hmm.
They've had a very near-death encounter, talking to by Aslan, and then a very long journey, and then just some really scary stuff, and now the world's collapsing.
Yeah.
There hasn't been a lot of time to have fun shared experiences together.
Mm-hmm. Well, Phil, after these apologies by Jill and Eustace, what happens next as they continue on?
Well, then we get another element added. Fireworks start going off.
And this is not the first time we've seen fireworks in Narnia.
When was the other time?
The other time was at Caspian's birth, not Caspian's birth, the birth of
that's
Miraz and... Ooh, you want to try to remember Miraz's wife's name?
Sepespian.
No.
Glacel?
No, I think it was Pruna Prismia.
That sounds close.
That sounds right? I think that's it.
Cornucopia?
The Queen Cornucopia. And that was, we saw fireworks back then. And you know what's frustrating about all of this is that when we had a son, our neighbors complained that I set off fireworks in the backyard.
Yeah. It was a different time.
A different time back then. No one complained when Miraz set off the fireworks, but if I do it in my backyard, then people call the cops. But hey,
to each their own.
Just the world we live in these days, man. You can't get away with anything. But you're right. It was with Queen
Pruna
Prismia and Miraz's son. So this is the second use of fireworks in the Narniad. What is the purpose of them here?
Well, I don't think we're sure, but it seems like it might be some sort of signal.
Yeah, we're not actually
given... That's Eustace's guess.
That's Eustace's guess. It's some kind of signal.
Well, in certain contexts, I think fireworks can be a good thing. However, when the world is literally collapsing on top of you, and it's flooding, and there's already fire, it seems like it's a bad thing. So the Puddleglum in me thinks that this is going to be a negative.
Well, speaking of Puddleglum too, it's right here at the bottom of this page where he looks over, sees water about 100 yards away, hardly 100 yards away, and remarks that there's not much danger of being burnt. That's the bright side of it.
Because they're about to get drenched.
Yeah. And that's, man, all these lines by Puddleglum, they just make the book so much better than it already is. A phenomenal book, but his just little asides here. He has great little one-liners.
Right. And I still think back to when he looks at all the glum faces in the caves and he says, now this is what I need. Someone to bring me back. Bring me down a little bit.
What our travelers don't need is what they run into next, which is a collection of gnomes. Tell me more about that.
These are different than the gnomes that we've seen and read about before. These have elephant or wild boar tusks, not elephant tusks. That would be really scary. They have wild boar tusks. They're just different shapes and sizes, and they're darting around. They're kind of hiding in the shadows and then trying to sneak around. Mm-hmm. What's funny is we keep getting descriptions of them sneaking around, so it sounds like they're not too good at it.
They don't seem to be paying that much of attention to our four travelers here. Like, they are paying attention to them, but they're also worried about themselves. This is the Death Star is blowing up, and Luke is dragging Darth Vader to the Imperial shuttle, and everyone's just like, I mean, we're all trying to save our lives, so sure, you can carry our boss out of here, right?
Yeah, they're not concerned with that.
Exactly. So that's how I kind of take this to be. Is like, wait, isn't that the prince? Is he supposed to be leaving with a bunch of other? Aren't those people? They're not. They're kind of captured, but everyone else is too worried about their own lives here.
Right. This is contrasted with a paragraph later. The prince is just having the best time. He's kind of riding his horse and whistling, and he's even singing snatches of songs, which is, he just must feel good to be free of that 10-year spell.
This is such a great scene here. And I mentioned earlier that a lot of this chapter was filled with this kind of gloomy atmosphere. And that's true to an extent, but maybe I would take that back somewhat, because there's a lot of funny things that happen, and almost all of the dread is somewhat undermined by Rillian's positivity and just like, hey guys, I'm free. This is great, Yeah.
And he certainly seems to be exhibiting some of the traits that he must have inherited from King Caspian, in that he's built for this role. And now that he's free of the spell, he just has this confidence, and everything's going wrong around him, but he knows what the plan is and he knows how to go about it.
Yeah. Well, they continue to travel, and then Puddleglum decides to do a little hunting, as Rillian calls it.
Yeah, he disappears. And I would love to see how they do this if we ever get to see a more recent version made of this book. I imagine that he just disappears into the shadows. There are lots of shadows around because we're still underground, and he just kind of fades away or sneaks off, or they don't notice that he's gone until they look around and see that he's not there. And then a few moments later, he comes back, and the only reason you hear him, he's so soft-footed that you can't hear him return, but then you hear the muffled squeals from the creature that he's snatched.
Yes, a creature who is biting his hand. Do you remember what he says there?
He says, now, if your hand was being bitten to the children, he said it would hurt a lot, but his skin's tough.
Yeah. Which Puddleglum is just so great about that. He's such a trooper.
He really is. Thick-skinned.
This is pretty much the end of this chapter here. So they come across this creature, and he doesn't really tell them his name. All he says is, promise you're not going to tell the queen anything I say. And Rillian says, the queen is dead. I killed her myself. His response is, dead, the witch dead, and by your honor's hand, why then your honor is a friend. Did you see this coming at all?
No, because I thought that all of the creatures were preparing to attack them as part of the doomsday plan. But this is a nice change.
It is. So since that's where this chapter wraps up, Phil, what is your prediction for next time? What are we going to learn? The next chapter is called The Bottom of the World. What are we going to learn about this creature? And
I think we'll get his name.
You think? Did you see that? Because it's on the next page. It says, "My name is Golg."
Maybe.
Fair enough. What do you think we're going to learn from Golg?
I feel like we will learn that he has had a really rough time with the queen or the witch ruling by fear, and that he's actually a good person. I don't know if this is correct, but my guess is that a lot of the creatures down there used to live above ground and were enchanted by the witch.
Yeah.
And after a while, it becomes permanent. Who knows? Maybe they'll be able to return to normal people, but that's my hope.
Yeah, we're going to find out more about that in the next chapter. That chapter, like I said, is entitled The Bottom of the World. And in that chapter, Golg tells our heroes about the land of Bism.
Oh.
Which I know means nothing to you right now.
Nope.
So, but before we do that, Phil, we have a little bit of listener feedback here. The first thing we have is actually a YouTube comment from Lydia that I wanted to read because it's something that has come up a lot in the Silver Chair, which is the idea of measurement and distances. We've talked a lot about yards and feet, and we made the comment a couple of episodes ago about, wait a second, how come we see yards in our copies of the book? Shouldn't it have the metric system because it's the UK? And I didn't know this, but listener Lydia, she wrote this. She said, about the imperial system of measurements, she did a lot of incredible research here. She says, according to this random site, compliments of Google, the UK is the birthplace of the imperial system, so like feet, yards, miles. And she said that Lewis probably actually did write yards in his original text because anecdotally, she's noticed that British folks hop back and forth between the two systems. And so I did a little bit more research as well, compliments of Google, and learned that actually, yeah, both are used in the UK.
Still interesting.
Mm-hmm. And you know, our UK listeners can tell me how much that is true. But I did read that the imperial system that we use here in America isn't completely absent from the lives of our British listeners.
Yeah. I do think that economic power has played a big role in that. This is a bigger discussion for another time, maybe a different podcast. But, I do think that the metric system is, you know, very, very much used around the world, but there's also a certain amount of power that comes with both the U.S. and England being a former number one spot in terms of economic power, but also still a big player. And they came up with a system. I always thought it was funny. I feel like the U.S. would have switched just as a matter of let's get rid of all the British stuff. But it's funny that we're still using the old one. Now England is using more the metric system.
So, Phil, we also have an email, though, from Isaiah. Do you want to go ahead and read that email?
Isaiah says, "Hey guys, my name's Isaiah, and I've been listening to the podcast for only about a week now, but I've read all the books several times, and it's really cool to notice how you bring up a lot of the things that I often also think of while reading them. I found the Lamppost Listener while trying to find a Narnia podcast for my youngest brother, and ended up reading my old Narnia books out loud to him, and I was the one who went on to listen to you for myself. Just as a side note, I don't have any spoilers in this email, so Phil can read it too. No worries. Something about this book in particular that is making me think is the character of the witch, or the Lady of the Green Kirtle, because she doesn't seem to have the same kind of attitude toward Aslan as the White Witch does. While the White Witch openly hates Aslan, argues with him, even kills him, the witch here seems more secretive, less confident, and almost afraid of him. She has a different approach to Aslan, not directly opposing him, but rather trying to win over those whom are most important using her beauty and smooth words, rather than fighting with a wand and an army of evil, scary creatures. Perhaps she embodies a different type of evil that Lewis is writing about. She's just as evil, but more hidden. I wonder if Lewis meant for the White Witch to be a more outwardly defiant type of sin, and the Green Lady to be a more hidden and shameful sin that oftentimes hides beneath the surface, hidden from others. Anyway, I just wanted to bring that up for you to think about as you finish the Silver Chair. And if this got you thinking, then let me know. I love your podcast, and I love Narnia, and I'm super excited for you to read The Magician's Nephew. Thanks again, Isaiah."
Well, thanks, Isaiah. This did get us thinking, which is why we read it here on the show. It got me thinking a lot about Screw Tape. Good old Uncle Screw, not good, evil old Uncle Screw Tape. David and Matt with Andrew Laszlo over on Pints with Jack have been going through the Screw Tape letters, so I have also been going through the Screw Tape letters as they've covered it. And I'm thinking a lot about how often Screw Tape, this is how he talks, right? It's not openly and outwardly defiant towards the patient, right? There's always these more seductive ways, these ways that are more secretive, that are much more subtle. That's what we see a lot in the Screw Tape letters. So I think Isaiah's right on the money when he talks about the kind of seduction we're seeing from the Green Lady here.
I do too. I think that he's onto something, and having read them all several times, I think has quite a bit of knowledge to back that up. I also appreciate you sharing it with your youngest brother, Isaiah. That's really fun that you ended up listening to it as well.
Yeah.
I'll also wrap it up here. This episode is made possible by our patrons over at patreon.com. If you'd like to support the show, you too can listen to a bonus episode each month along with other rewards. Special thanks goes to Elias Dean, John Marr, Emily Margaret, and Ryan Smith for supporting us at our top tiers. You can follow us into Narnia on our Twitter and Facebook pages. And if you have any feedback, email us at thenarniapodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 406-646-6733. A review on Apple Podcasts would also be appreciated. This helps other people find the show and join our read-through. By subscribing, you can make sure the show is in your favorite podcast app, and you can wake up to a new episode every other Wednesday. Thank you for coming along on this journey, and we will be back next time with Chapter 14.